Lindsay Smith with RealAgriculture.com. I'm joined today by Darren Robinson. He's an associate professor with the University of Guelph here on Ridgetown campus. We're talking cover crops and herbicide injury. So you've been looking at several kinds of cover crops, several kinds of herbicides, and evaluating what injury we might see. First off, though, what did you evaluate beyond visual injury?
Okay, so what we were looking at was to see whether or not a herbicide that had been applied in a previous year or 4 months before the cover crops were planted, what level of visible injury we would see, also what would be the impact on the above ground growth, the total amount of nitrogen that the plants took up, the root growth, and also the ability of the cover crops to either compete with weeds by intercepting light or to improve soil structure through influencing soil aggregate stability.
So now, a few things. What seemed to influence the amount of injury that you saw? So what are the things that influence carryover, I guess?
Okay. So the different environmental factors that influence carryover the most, the primary factor is the amount of rainfall that we get in the year of herbicide application right after the herbicide has been applied. Typically, the first 3 months after a herbicide is applied is when most of the herbicide is broken down, and that's where rainfall will have the biggest effect.
So now you did find certainly, well, in looking at some of the looking at the table here, there were several that really there was very little impact at all.
Yes.
But there are a couple that are pretty much no-goes at this point. So what were those?
So the primary ones that we noticed where there was injury and also a loss of function of the cover crops or impairment of function of the cover crops was where either broadstrike RC or Pursuit had been applied the year before growing the buckwheat. Also where Lumax EZ had been applied before growing the annual ryegrass. And the last one, though it was influenced by environment, was where Pursuit had been applied before the sorghum Sudan grass in the spring-seeded cover crop trials. In our fall-seeded cover crop trials, where Pursuit had been applied 4 months before tillage radish, we saw injury and also loss of function of the tillage radish.
Now, a few things. Are there certain groups then, really, that groups of herbicides that farmers need to perhaps have a bit of caution with? Because there was that one other crop with the sorghum Sudan grass that you're sort of looking more into.
I would say to be careful basing it on herbicide groups. The response is very typically herbicide specific, and a lot of it has to do with the different rates that we apply the herbicides at, and also their persistence characteristics. So for a herbicide that is much more persistent in the soil and degrades at a slower rate, it might be in the same group or the same herbicide family as another herbicide, but that other herbicide can break down at a faster rate. So unfortunately, we can't look at specific herbicide groups.
Now tell me just a little bit before we go, a bit of the work that you're just getting started on, which is putting or seeding cover crops into corn and soy.
Yes.
So tell me a bit about what's to come on that side.
Okay. So we're looking at 3 different sets of trials. I'll talk about the corn and the soybean work that we're doing. In the corn trials, what we're doing is we're interseeding cover crops at the 4 to 5 leaf stage of the corn and looking at the effect of different herbicides that were applied as pre-emergence herbicides to the corn, how they influence the cover crops. The primary herbicide cover crop combination that we would be most concerned with in the case of corn is the herbicides that belong to the group 15. So we can somewhat generalize the group 15s in this case usually cause injury to annual ryegrass. And that would be the 3 main herbicides that we're looking at are Dual, Outlook, and also herbicides that have pyroxasulfone in them. So that would be something like Focus or Fierce, which can cause injury to annual ryegrass.
One last thing before I forget, you did have a slide of tillage radish that went into soybeans, and one of the questions was, did it interfere with harvest?
Okay.
So if we can quickly just cover that one, because I thought that certainly was an interesting question.
That is an excellent question, and there definitely would be some concern if we got a lot of growth of the tillage radish that it could possibly interfere with harvest, or it could cause issues with moisture because you have wet leaf material being harvested at the same time as the soybeans, and that could be a harvest issue for them. In our trials, we did not see that effect. However, tillage radish can grow at different rates depending on field conditions and time of harvest relative to the time of seeding the tillage radish. So I would advise some caution that tillage radish interseeded into soybeans. In this case, we interseeded the tillage radish at leaf drop of the soybeans. There is some potential that it could be a harvest issue.
Unless you had pursuit residues, and then it knocked it back.
The applications of pursuit made to the soybeans did injure the tillage radish and stunt them enough that it might possibly.
But sort of defeats the purpose. Yes. So yes, okay, good to know. All right, well, thank you so much, Darren. Lots to come on this, obviously, and we will keep tabs because lots of interesting research coming out of your work. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much.